things we should point out to everybody who's watching and listening is that we're already 3/4 of the way down the digital currency pipeline, because there isn't really much difference between a credit card or a bank card and digital currency. And the reason I say there's not much difference is because when you use a credit card or a bank card to make a transaction, there's a digital record of the transaction, and then that digital record can be brokered. And so far, mostly it's brokered to other corporations, which isn't as totalitarian as it might be, because so far, most corporations just want your money so they can sell you things. Now, that can be problematic because you can have things pushed on you by what do you call corporations that are going a little bit farther than they should, that you don't really need or want, but at least you get something out of the bargain. But once we're fully digital in our currency, that'll mean the government will be able to track absolutely every bloody thing you ever do, and also be able to do things like they're already doing in China. So the Chinese government has put expiry dates on some digital currency. So they, if they need to have the population spend more, let's say because there is a recession, they could just put in an edict that would make sure that your money depreciated by 2% every month, so that would be an impetus to spending. And they could do the reverse if they wanted you to save. And so it means in potential the emergence of a system for comprehensive control that's so complete that we can barely imagine it. What we were really in was an epidemic of imitating the Chinese communists. And we ran to imitate them as fast as we possibly could. And that Chinese communist regime, they just re-elected Xi Jinping the other day with a 2,952-0 margin for the next 5 years. The probability that he's president for life is extraordinarily high. And so we are in danger of using the Chinese Communist Party and its vaunted efficiencies on the energy and environment front as a model for totalitarian governance across the world. We thought when we integrated China into the world economy that the Chinese would turn into a Western democracy. But what's happening instead, I would say, is that because we've invited the Chinese to the table, we're turning into the CCP. Yeah, and people are certainly not, and we're doing it under the guise of this idiot protect the virginal planet environmentalism that's all motivated by this, what would you say, fear-mongering apocalypse narrative.
That's probably the fundamental question of our time. So that's why we have to say no to all of these things. We have to say no to CBDCs, we have to say no to digital identity, we have to say no to 15-minute cities, because they're all the same thing. But it's problematic, it's hard in Western society, in the mind of modern men nowadays, to tell them that, those nice little pretexts that they use to sell this to us are not actually the truth. We need a return to real ethical debate about where we want to go as a civilization. And that's why it's so important, I think, what you are trying to do also with an alternative to something like the World Economic Forum, because those discussions are not being held. We are being sold lies, we are being sold false premises, pretexts, and we are forced to debate within that circle of lies oftentimes, and it's the exact same thing with the Dutch farmers. That's why they're all these subjects are related to each other, because they're all a matter of, are we going to give up our freedom for a bit of convenience, or for, those nice words that they try to sell us? And I think the answer should be absolutely not, but it's hard.
Yeah. Well, and then on the digital currency front, and Eva, I'll turn to this alternative that you described in a minute. On the digital currency front, I think something like a digital currency is inevitable because we're already 3/4 of the way there. And the only real alternative I can see to the top-down centralized digital currency that's being offered by the governments in collusion, let's say with the WEF, is going to be something like a decentralized system. And it looks to me like the best decentralized system that's in place for currency at the moment is Bitcoin. And I don't know if Bitcoin's the solution, but I don't think any of the other electronic coins, digital currencies, have the same advantages or the same genuine radical decentralization as Bitcoin. And then one of the things we're working through is what the story that might unite us might be. And the story that we're being presented right now is that human activity, especially at the industrial level, is intrinsically destructive in relationship to pristine nature and has to be limited by force if necessary because there's an apocalyptic emergency at hand. And I do not believe for a moment that there is a single apocalyptic emergency at hand. There may be a multitude of them in many different directions, but to assume that it's a mere consequence, let's say, of nitrogen overproduction or carbon overproduction is a radical oversimplification of pathological magnitude. And I also don't believe the idea that limits to growth that are imposed from the top down are the only way that human beings can manage, what would you say, harmonious relationships with the broader biosphere. I think instead that if we got our structures of governance put in place properly, like they generally are in free Western countries, that people could cooperate well enough so that everyone could be rich, including the absolutely poor around the world, and that rich people who have opportunity and a certain degree of security would start to attend to local environmental concerns in a manner that would make the planet greener and more sustainable. We're trying to put forward a vision of abundance and freedom and, let's say, environmental stewardship, so mature relationship. And so that's definitely underway, and we have a lot of people, a lot of the public have already clambered on board. I've got a mailing list of about 40,000 people, and we have a large number of well-positioned cultural, artistic, business, and political leaders on board as well. We're trying not to make it an elitist enterprise for the reasons that we've already described. And I think everybody who's part of the core group really is afraid of elitist enterprises, and also concerned that any attempts on the international level are likely to turn into nothing but an elitist enterprise. But we're at least going to try to put forward a vision that's much more voluntary and decentralized and positive than this bloody top-down Tower of Babel centralized apocalypse narrative that everybody's being force-fed now.
It's so funny to me always how they attack the minds of people, really, and especially young minds, from both ways. It's on the one hand this apocalyptic, like the whole world is going to come to an end, a really alarmist story. And then on the other hand, on the individual level, it's an anything goes story. Everything is relative, you know? There's your truth, there's my truth, there's nothing such as an absolute truth, you know? There's no God, there's no real morality, everything goes. And that combination is so incredibly deadly. And that's why I think it's so important what you're doing with this, and we need to counter it.